In a world where hustle culture collides with wellness warnings and workplace demands keep evolving, how do we stay sharp without burning out? How do we navigate the endless stream of wellness trends while actually getting results? This is the Work and Wellness Podcast, and I'm your host, Ange Davies. Drawing from my own journey of wins, stumbles, and honest revelations, I'll be bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with experts and inspiring guests who've been there, lived it, and found a better way. Together, we'll cut through the noise and workshop what it really means to be well in today's workplace. No more choosing between success and sanity. No more sacrificing health for achievement. Whether you're struggling with burnout, searching for purpose, or simply ready to work smarter, not harder, you're in the right place. This is real talk about real solutions for real people. Let's get into it. Hello, friends. Welcome to the show. I am thrilled to be welcoming Jackie Maloney to the show today. Jackie is a speaker, communication coach, and storytelling expert who helps people find their voice and share their message with confidence. From a young age, Jackie was drawn to acting as a way to tell stories that might otherwise go unheard. But it wasn't just about performance. It was about connection, influence, and impact. Now Jackie empowers professionals, business owners, and thought leaders to communicate with clarity, presence, and authenticity, whether on stage, in meetings, or through digital platforms. She's helped clients land keynote speaking opportunities, media appearances, and podcast interviews that have absolutely transformed their careers. Today, we're going to dive into why finding your voice is not just important for your career, but also your mental well-being, confidence, and success. Welcome to the show, Jackie.
Hello, Angela. Hello, everyone listening. It's just a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It's so good to have you, and I think you have just so much wisdom to share with people. Your journey started in acting. What did that teach you about the power of voice and storytelling for self-expression?
Growing up, I struggled with expression. I think we all do when we're just trying to find our way in the world, and acting I just found a love and a freedom from being able to use my imagination and be playful. And what it taught me was that there are so many stories out there that need to be told. And quite often I think about going back to COVID days, when everyone was in lockdown, what did we rely upon the most? Binging Netflix and Tiger King, listening to audiobooks, listening to music and musicians. Like, art creates possibilities for us to escape or to learn or to feel our feelings that little bit more deeply. So acting was that for me. It allowed me to do that so much. And, it's one of those things that I've maintained throughout my young adulthood. And a lot of the skills that I learned during acting is what I now bring to my coaching services as well. So it's still very much a part of me.
Yeah, you mentioned Tiger King, and that's so hilarious because I totally forgot about that. But my God, weren't we all so invested in Carol Baskin? Oh my gosh. But it is so true. It's the power of stories that I think really captivate us. And, that was a powerful story that we were all so captivated by. Yep. I think when we speak about storytelling, self-expression, the power of voice, a lot of people really struggle to speak up at work or in leadership roles. When you're working with clients, what do you see as the common barriers, first of all, to speaking up? And then how do you help people overcome those?
Yeah, it's something that affects everybody. I just want to put that out there, that this is not something that plagues some and not others. Everyone feels this hesitation to put themselves forward, and it comes down to we don't want that spotlight on us, because with that comes, people maybe judging us or presuming that we're going to say the wrong thing. We take a lot of this on board before we've even had a chance to open our mouths. So we've stopped ourselves before we've even had the opportunity. And what I help people with is, at the end of the day, the purpose is bigger than the conversation. At work, it's usually because you want to get points across that's going to make such a difference in a project that you're all working on together as a team. Maybe it's you going for, your next job appraisal, and maybe you're after some more money or more responsibilities, or maybe you want more flexibility with, the roster that you've been given. Maybe you want a 9-day fortnight instead of 10. And this is all just part of negotiation. But, we want these things because they're going to help us achieve things outside of our career. More money helps us with financial freedom or, putting a deposit down on the house. Less hours at the office means more time with our kids. So like the purpose and the intention is there. But again, it's just these micro moments that just stop us in our tracks from going after everything that we want. And so when I work with my clients, I really get them to connect to what that vision is and what that greater purpose is. Then we will go back and do some work. Right? How is my state management before walking into a board meeting where I'd like to express some ideas that I've been working on for the last 3 months and I haven't told anyone about, and this is my opportunity? Or how can I make sure that I've got a bit of an idea, some dot points in mind of things that I would like to pitch to my boss about this next job appraisal? And then we start working on our voice and how we communicate these points. Because you can do all the work in the background, you can manage your nerves, you can get yourself into a position where you just say, okay, great, I'm feeling this. This is what I'm really after. It's going to make such a significant difference to my family. This is what I want. You can do all of that in the background. But when, push comes to shove, when you're in that room, how are you then communicating your message, your needs, your desires, your ideas for something that you've been, pouring so much of your heart and soul into? So we work out delivery, right? There's no point sitting there in the chair and just eyes down, not making eye contact with anybody, speaking in a very, very soft voice because, I want to say something, but I don't want to come across as too assertive or too confident or too ego. That's for extroverts. I don't do that. Or, postures hunched over, or, we're talking about, I would really love if I could organize or factor into my next contract, like a 9-day fortnight instead. How does that sound? Like none of that breeds the confidence that the person on the other side, whether or not that be a team of 10 or 50 or whoever you're presenting to or your boss, none of that gives them the confidence in you in what you're asking. So then we work on that as well. So it is a bit of a staged process, but I just want to make sure that my clients have got all the tools in the toolbox that they can keep coming back to if the nerves do start creeping in. If someone maybe challenges something that they're saying, instead of going, okay, that was me, I'm done. It's just like, okay, great. This is part of negotiation. It's part of compromise. Just because someone says no, I feel like we need to take the emotion out of the word no. It's not a no forever. It's a no for right now. But what else is possible? And I give my clients a few sort of different avenues. They say no to the pay rise. Okay, great. No problems. I thought then if that wasn't possible, could we look at this? Or could we look at this? Like give yourself options, give them options. They're more than likely to receive that with more respect for you and probably go back and consider it more seriously.
Preparing for a no and then renegotiating after that no, because sometimes if you get a no, it completely throws you off and then closes you down. Correct. So I think that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah. And it happened with a client and she was actually on stage. So, big audience in front of her. What she said really resonated with her audience and they started cheering and clapping. And so, it threw her off. And we hadn't had the time to prepare for what happens if you do get interrupted. Like it was a positive interruption. Don't get me wrong. It was the best interruption you could ever hope for as a speaker. But it just threw her off because she got swept up in that moment. And then we needed to find that gap and that skill set in that gap to recover. So as you just shared, it's like when someone says no to you, what do I do? Where is the skill? Where are my speaking skills to actually bring me back from that? So it's important. There's so many layers to it. But yeah, once you find that, it's just any conversation you have, you're ready. And again, you're also then you're not reacting with emotion. You can react so much more calmly and actually get your message across rather than, oh, great, I knew you wouldn't get it. You don't respect me. You don't respect the work that I do for your company. I've been here, blah, 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 blah. Just like, okay, here is a second and a third option that I've already pre-thought about. And here is how I think it could really work for both of us. It's such a different way to go into things.
And I think preparation is key, right? Because when something like that happens, you can literally say to yourself, and I've done this before, okay, I've prepared for this, right? That's the outcome. I've prepared for this outcome. So my next step in the process that I've already prepared for is to now say this. Yes. Okay, that's happened. Now I'm going to say this. So preparation is really key. And I think that's such an important point. Once you've worked with people on this, how do you find their confidence and I guess even well-being changes? Have you seen in your clients that their confidence grows and as a result, their well-being improves?
Absolutely. When people, and women in particular, find confidence in their voice, and I feel very conflicted with this whole concept of finding my voice. Every one of us has a voice. We just haven't been given that permission slip to use it properly. Whether or not that's been conditioning from family, society, at work, being a female in the workplace, especially if it's a more male-dominated workplace or industry, we've been told and fed certain things that have prevented us from using our voice in the full capacity that it was gifted to us in the first place. So I want to take this sort of way of finding my voice. I have one. Now it's about learning the skills to actually use it to propel me forward or to make changes or do something different, change the trajectory of what I've just, I guess, submitted to. And so when you master that, again, not just at work, but this means that there's better communication at home, with friends, boundaries start becoming so much clearer and more defined. It's wonderful to see that if you are a woman who's, building a business online, it's showing up more confidently. No longer are we scared. We may not be full influencer ready, but at least we've been able to find the messages and the connection with our audience that's making people want to be drawn to us and want to work with us and come to our events or buy our programs. So the cascading effect is incredible.
I think that's such a powerful share, Jackie, that it doesn't just impact in the moment in what you're doing or the outcome of even what you're negotiating or what you're saying, but it's actually so far reaching, around asserting your boundaries or, speaking up for yourself or standing your ground as well. So I think that's really important that it translates even so far beyond the workplace or your work and into how you show up in life and your strength and resilience through life as well. When you see people make that change, so when you're seeing them start to assert themselves more and feeling like they're, in their power, are there a couple of mindset shifts that you feel like are really powerful or that you've seen happen for these people?
When we touched just before and you said, there is a purpose at play here, like when we are so fixed on the vision, and sometimes that's hard for people to imagine if they've never been there before, right? It's hard for me to say, oh, on the other side of this, you're going to get that, that, and that. If you've never experienced that before, it's kind of hard to feel into that. But the beautiful Brittany Saunders, who's an incredible young businesswoman, she's got her, social media following, but she's also got Fat the Label. And she said something in the car on the way to a speaking event just yesterday or the day before. And she said, what helps me with speaking events, because it's not something that comes naturally. She's great on social media, right? But that's very, very different. Being on stage, you've got nowhere to hide. You can't press stop and delete and record that video again. There's no filters, there's people live looking at you, wanting to hear all of your knowledge. But what she said was, in my mind, I think that there is a future version of me who's already done this. And on the other side of that stage is she's going to be able to then go and connect with people who come up to her and say, that was amazing. And I loved that, right? Like in a perfect world, future me is already walking off stage and is just basking in the glory. And sure, maybe there were mistakes being made, but at least she committed to doing something and she followed through. And it happened with a client of mine just last week. The very first time she ever found herself on stage was in front of 50 people. And she was talking about how she suffered her whole life from anxiety and how it has prevented her from doing all of these things that she's ever dreamed about. One of them was which is public speaking. Now, she acknowledges that it wasn't the most perfect performance, but when she gave me her WhatsApp on the way home in the car, the words that came out of her mouth were, When's the next stage? And that is so powerful for a woman who's always told herself, that's not available to me. And honestly, in the lead up for that week leading up to that event, there were multiple voice notes from her just going, don't think that I can do this. I can't, Jackie. I'm feeling all the nerves. I'm feeling all of this. And I'm just in her ear constantly just going, you can do this. You can do this. I want you to imagine the conversations of the mothers in that room that are going to come up and connect with you because of something that you shared with them. That's going to be vastly different to the other speakers on the stage. And she's just like, yeah, this is not about me. And I think that that's such an important thing to drive home for a lot of people, is that it is for others. It's for your family. It's for financial freedom. It's for you taking the next step at work. Like, you know what's possible if you take that position and how that's going to affect the rest of your, your team. Like, yeah, I just really want people to hold on to that.
That's a great mindset shift. And it's certainly something I've used, Jackie, when I am speaking on stage, that the message is more important than me. I'm just there delivering it.
Yep.
It's the message that's actually the most important thing. And, what I think I've learnt too is I tell myself, no one wants you to fail. Like, no one in that audience, everyone's there to support you, right? And so sometimes just reminding yourself of that, no one's judging you. People want to hear your message and they want you to succeed. So they're there to support you. So I think that's a really powerful share. Touching on that a little more, obviously when people are on stage or they're presenting at work, there is a message to convey. So whatever that message is, whether it is preparing a report and presenting it to board, whether it's communicating with your team in a team meeting, or whether you're on stage, what makes a message truly land and stick with an audience?
Great question. Two things: relevance and surprise. Because what I'm seeing so much is that people are grabbing snapshots or moments on stage, these sound bites in podcasts, and the thing that they share from that podcast interview is something that I've heard a million times before. Right? When we talk about, you can have everything you've ever wanted, you can achieve, you can have everything. It's just like, I've heard that a million times before. That's not new news to me. I'm not inspired by that. And sometimes when people they haven't done their homework when it comes to their audience, they're making pop culture references, but giving no context to it. They're just like, well, I know what this show is, but then I've been sat in an audience before and I've looked around and people have just got this confused look on their face to say, I've never watched that show, so I don't know what they're saying. So you've got to be so mindful that the messages and the references or any statistics or something like that you're using to really cultivate this message and give it depth, it must be something that the majority of the room, the boardroom, the audience of 1,000 people understand. Otherwise, you're taking them out of the conversation now and they feel like they're not a part of this anymore. Oh, I would only get that if I've watched that TV show. I mean, a lot of us don't have time. We're not up to date with what's just happened on maths or something like that. There was this beautiful example where I went to a high school and they were judging a public speaking competition. God bless 16-year-olds. And she made reference to 13 Reasons, which was very much a Netflix show about life as a teenager at high school. They were presenting to a group of Rotarians who, I'll be very honest, 60 plus, and that's being very generous. And some of the feedback given was, oh, you made reference to a show and I don't know what that show is. So whilst I get that the message was really, really important, because if she was pitching to high school students, they would have been in on the message, right? But she spoke to an average age of, 60, 70 plus. I'm being very generous here and no one would argue with that. And so there was this really beautiful moment that she completely let her audience out of the conversation. So it has to be relevant and people have to know if you're going to pitch something. Also, when someone says the statistics show, I was like, okay, but where are you getting your stats from? Is it because you saw it as a Facebook post, but you didn't read the rest of the article? So people do want that little bit of extra information so that if they were to read something, or when someone said, oh, I listened to this podcast, I was like, what podcast? Tell me. I'm hungry to learn more from you. And if you've told me it's a book or a podcast that you've read, please give me that information, because I'd love to then go and listen to that myself and understand more about what it is that you're talking about, because we've only got such a short period of time. So just making sure that that message is relevant and it just has, you know, moments in there that have not been regurgitated 100 times already by every second podcaster and influencer, you know, on social media or Spotify.
I think that is so relevant, Jackie, because we're in a world of information overload. I heard the term information obesity. We're in an information obesity epidemic. And I thought that is such a powerful term for the amount of information we have. And I think that's relevant both on social media, on LinkedIn, but also at work, right? You think about executives, they are taking in so much information. So how do you make what you're presenting, or your team, right? They're in information overload as well. How do you make what you're presenting relevant so that they stay engaged, like you said, but also put in some surprise and delight in there where they're like, oh, hold on a minute. Wait, what did you say? If they've tuned out or, you know, what did you say again? Because I haven't heard that before. So I think that's really practical that people can implement. And I really like what you're saying too around being less general around, I listened to a podcast or, you know, I spoke to a friend or the stats show, but where have those stats come from to create a little bit of credibility as well, you know, because anyone can say research and it could just be someone did a survey somewhere, you know?
Yep. If you were to say that the research from Harvard in 2024, I don't need the doctor. I mean, maybe you do, depending on your audience. Maybe I would want to reference who the person who has run that research. Of course, that's going to give me way more credibility. It's going to give my message more credibility because I've gone and done my homework rather than just plucked a soundbite from someone's podcast without listening to the whole episode. I've just taken what feels really, really good for me in my ego, but I haven't thought about who's hearing that information from me. And you never want someone to come back and fact check you because credibility ruined.
Absolutely. Thinking more about presenting, and so we've talked a little bit about the content, we've talked about sort of how you build your courage to speak your message, but a lot of people do have a fear of public speaking, and you spoke about your client who has experienced anxiety. Were there any other practical strategies, whether physical strategies or exercises that you teach your clients that people can do before they go into that presentation or on stage that helps to calm the nerves a little bit?
Yes. Many, but I'll distill it down into, I think, the three most important ones. Practice, practice, practice. Beyonce rehearsed for 8 months before she headlined Coachella. And this is arguably one of the best performers of our generation. She's been doing it a really long time. But in this practice, in this rehearsal, knowing where she has to hit her marks, when someone comes to me and they say, oh, I don't want to sound so scripted, that's probably because you're not doing enough rehearsal and practice behind the scenes, right? You've memorized your speech. You say the same lines the exact same way every single time. You preempt the question before it gets asked of you because you've been given your notes from the podcast host and you go, great, I'm going to say this, and this. You haven't used your entire instrument. Your voice, how can we push that voice? You know, in this podcast itself, and if you're listening to this, I apologize in advance, but I'm using my whole body when I speak. I'm using my hands. I mean, yes, I'm sitting down. I'm still leaning forward at certain points that I would really like to make more of an impact. And when that's quite visual and in the room, people cannot not take notice of that and not be paying attention to that. But if I was to sit back and sit still and this was in person and recorded and we're just having a chat, there's nothing engaging about that. I mean, for me, we're in the currency of attention. You're selling me your attention, vice versa. If I'm not capturing that in 3 minutes, you're not buying from me. If I'm slouching, if it sounds like I'm, you know, just rereading it by parrot, like I'm going to pick up on that straight away. So practicing, changing up the cadence of your voice. Where can I add more pauses? How can I add more excitement and intrigue by really slowing down and moving forward for my audience to take it all in? When we speed through things at the same pace, at the same tone, and not allowing our audience those moments to absorb what we're saying, you've just missed moments of gold for them, not you. Again, it's all about who's listening to you. And I keep using audience in a general term, but anyone that you speak to is your audience. My dad is a tragic at this. I don't know how many times I've heard the same story from him about his upbringing. I've lost count. Angela, I have been at coffee with my dad and I've been sat there like this, just going, yes, Dad, yeah. And he's just talking at me. He has not absorbed any of my physicality because he's all operating from ego and me and not about who he's speaking to. Missed. So missed. So preparation is key. Flexing every muscle you have available to you, whether or not that's physical or using your voice. I get a lot of my clients to read their stories to their kids at nighttime, putting on accents. I want you to whisper, like your kids are going to love it. And it just, it doesn't leave the bedroom for you. This is just play. Like I think when we get told at a young age, okay, now it's time to be serious, we lose this element of play and fun when we communicate. And I just get people to try and bring that back. And the third thing is I want you to try and make a fool of yourself as much as possible. So I was saying in a coaching session last night, if you were to ever be in the car next to me at a set of traffic lights on my way to a speaking engagement, I would hate to think what that footage would look like plastered all over social media. I'm singing at the top of my lungs. That is a Taylor Swift concert happening in my car. I'm doing moves. I'm just getting everything prepared so that when I go on stage, if I fall over, great, that comes into my presentation with me and we make light of it. If I miss my lines, okay, great. My audience has got no idea what I'm saying next. So that just gives me a couple of minutes to buy myself some time. I might repeat the last line. I might make a joke. And then hopefully I've done my work and I get back on track and no one is any the wiser. But so much of it comes into before you even enter that boardroom, get on stage, press record on a podcast.
They say, I have seen a lot of things around Steve Jobs, right? Every time he would launch a new product, and he's so famous for his speeches that he would do. And he is known to have practiced between 100 and 200 times before he would get on that stage. And that's someone like Beyonce, I guess, who is used to doing that, who's up there all the time. And I think if people like that are practicing so much, then we absolutely have to be practicing so much. Yep. And I really love what you said about making a fool of yourself, because when we take ourselves too seriously, I find that's when you feel like you have so much more at stake. Yes. When you're up there having fun, people can feel that, they feel the energy. And then if something goes wrong, you're like, okay, don't want to take myself too seriously and on to the next. And so I think it really prepares you for that. I think we're so serious in life sometimes. Even if our topic is serious, we don't have to always be so serious.
Exactly. And just add to that, when we allow us to have fun, our audience has fun. But the flip side of that is I never want you to walk into a boardroom meeting, a presentation, being on stage and announcing, I'm nervous. Never, ever, ever do that. You might be feeling that through every fiber of your being, but please do not tell your audience, because immediately you've just said to them, oh, okay, she's nervous. So anything that happens thereafter, oh, poor thing. I just feel so sorry for her, right? We've given them a way out. It's a caveat now. Anything that happens, oh, don't worry about it because I'm nervous, so I'm just going to try my best, right? If speaking is a privilege, presenting in front of your board, your team, that is a privilege. And we need to do everything in our power, especially if you're getting paid to speak on somebody else's stage. You have to do everything you can to be the most professional. I'm not saying not fun, but the most professional for that audience, because they are not there to see you being nervous or being ill-prepared.
And our brain is trained to look for what we say. You know, if someone tells you something about a red car, what do you see for the remainder of the days to come? Red cars. And so from a neuroscience perspective, your audience's brain is now going to look for those nerves. Yep. So they may not have seen it previously, and now your brain is actually going to start to look for that. So correct. I think you don't want to call into the forefront something that you don't want your audience to see.
Because when you say you feel nervous, physically, that's exactly what's going to happen for you. If you then change that and reframe that to say, oh, I'm just feeling, I've got some nerves. It's such a different physical reaction to what's going on for you, right? I can handle, I've got a few nerves, but I'm nervous is different.
I don't know if this is a technique or not, but I try and say to myself, that feeling that I'm feeling that I think is nerves is excitement, because it's the same physiological feeling in your body. So I just try and keep telling myself that's just excitement. And I think the more that we convince our brains it's that, the more you go on and be like, okay, I'm excited. So I find that really helps as well.
Yeah. I think we need to stop putting so much emphasis on nerves and getting rid of them. I welcome them. She has a name. She sits on my left shoulder. Doing this podcast, presenting last night, going to a networking event, every single time she's there just going, you know, oh, you're putting yourself out there again. Oh, you're going to another networking event. No one's going to care what you have to say, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, cool. I'm not going to get rid of her. She's always going to be there, so I can fight it and Jackie, I need to get rid of my nerves. I say welcome them along, because they're trying to keep you small. And then going back to what we were saying earlier, when the vision and the purpose is so strong, I'd be like, cool, well, you're coming with me over there, whether you like it or not. But the fight to get rid of things is just that we're fighting against things all the time. Get them to come with you.
The cool thing too is nerves actually help us to focus greater.
Yes.
So it's just like if we're in a nervous situation, like a fight or flight, it actually narrows our focus and gets us really, really focused and present. And so, so what our brains are doing is actually helping us. So that can be another helpful reframe I find as well. You know, these nerves are helping me focus and be present, and I'm just going to utilize them for that. So
great.
It's helpful to know that as well. You've worked with a lot of clients on thought leadership as well. So, you know, going from not just presenting in a boardroom or on stage, but taking those really core ideas and creating thought leadership out of those. How do you work through that process for refining an idea for your clients?
This is the part of the process that takes the longest. And it's the part that people kind of skip over because they just want to get to stage, or they just want to get better, or they just don't want to keep feeling how they've been feeling for such a long period of time. However, we start talking about story and messages, and then I think I'm working with some clients at the moment about what are your 5 key sound bites that you want to be known for? What are these sound bites that are going to differentiate you from everybody else in your field? And now that takes a lot of pulling stories out of my clients. So I talk about having a story bank. I've got a folder on my laptop right now. Every Saturday morning, I will take myself out for coffee, or I'll have a coffee at home and just sit somewhere and write. I will pull up things that have happened to me during the week. Did I have a conversation at a networking event? What about my prep for that networking event? Maybe it was something that came up for me with a coaching call, or something that was fed back to me from my coaching clients. And I will just write down a few notes about what that is, what day it was, who the person I was speaking to, or was it a podcast that I listened to? Great. Who was on that podcast? So when I retell these stories, because I have found moments where this fits perfectly, I'd say it was Stephen Bartlett when he was interviewing Vanessa Edwards, and it was talking about, the power of social cues. Right? If I just said a podcast I was listening to with Stephen Bartlett, well, I mean, Jesus, I don't know how many podcast episodes he's up to right now. Yes, you maybe could have gone and done a Google search, but I've done some of the legwork for you, and I've now made it so much easier for you to connect the dots because of the information I've given you. But if I don't have a story bank, and suddenly I'm in a podcast or I'm in a live TV interview or something, and they drop a question that maybe I'm not ready for, in my Rolodex of stories, I can pull something out and be ready to present that as professionally and as succinctly as I possibly can, rather than being put on the spot, which is what everyone hates. I hate it when I get asked questions and all of this starts happening. Take a deep breath in your belly, center yourself, and go quick scan of Rolodex. What could I answer here? Pull that one from this time. I've got all of the delicious details and none of the fluff. Answer the question, get out. It is so important for us to keep track of things that we want to be known for. Otherwise, you'll be in a conversation for 10 minutes and the other person's just like, okay, great. I don't even think you've answered the question. I forgot what the question actually was now. Coming back to, we're in this currency of attention. I need to grab your attention and I need to keep it. And that requires work. So it will take a little while for you to get into a habit of creating these things. I'm working with someone in circular economy at the moment, and we've come up with a soundbite of, instead of focusing on recycling, we should focus on reuse. Because when products get created, her soundbite is the damage has already been done. So rather than mining for more resources to make the same product, how can we keep this one thing in rotation, in circulation for as long as it possibly can? And it's a great soundbite for her to use. So she's got these moments that anytime she's in a TV interview, podcast, you name it, we can keep coming back to those. I almost liken it to a politician's like standard answer. You can hear it getting asked from the journalist and they repeat the same thing 5 times over. And I'm just like, okay, cool. I get it. You've got to keep towing policy line. They're there to try and slip you up because they want to catch you out. But this is just elevating it to a professional speaker or communicator level. If I've got 5 things that I know I can rely on every single time, they're questions that people always ask me, so I'll get on the front foot and answer it in my answer already. It just shows a level of professionalism, but competency as a speaker, that you're not wasting people's time because you've gone back and done your homework.
I think stories are so powerful too, you know? So if you are sort of finding your way to that response, those stories are engaging and captivating for people as well. So it keeps them engaged.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on filling that time while you're going through that Rolodex versus sitting in silence and pausing? What's your preference and what do you advise in situations like that? If you have a question that throws you off guard, you're like, oh God, okay, let me think through my Rolodex. Do you advise people to just pause and sit in that silence comfortably or to fill the space?
I would suggest a pause over anything else. Pause can be taken 2 ways. We think that a pause means, or generally speaking, we think that a pause means that they don't know what they're talking about. Whereas when someone is very considered, they're very confident, they're very assured of who they are, what they stand for, what the greater purpose is, what the message is, it's just that moment to collect your thoughts and then speak rather than filling this gap. I was sharing just the other night that, you know, the whole concept of is such a fascinating one. I've actually not said anything constructive in that 5-second gap. Does not have a definition. It's not helping anybody by using it in sentences. And in fact, it's detracting from the core part of the message. So if I've got to, do my elevator pitch in 60 seconds and half of that is in between every couple of words, I've just lost ample screen time or like game time to actually really permeate and make impact with the people who are hearing my elevator pitch. Other great strategies are, repeating the question. Other great strategies are saying, Angela, that's a really, really great question. And what I would say to that is, so I've actually said something that's constructive. I've acknowledged the question. I've actually given you a bit of an ego boost by asking a good question. But what this actually is just doing is buying me a bit more time until I can figure out which story I'm going to share. But I will just say, when you have your 5, it just makes life so much easier, right? Rather than going through 100, exhausting. And you're probably going to miss elements of it. And then you're kind of diluting the impact of that story. So when you've got your 5, I love it when, you listen to Sarah Blakely from Spank Speak. It's the same story every single time. I could repeat her story, the timeline, the numbers, the fact that she started with 5K savings, the fact that, she flew herself to Bergdorf Goodman and actually wore Spanx in front of the buyer for them. She got there. She knew that if she was there in person showing the transformation of wearing Spanx or wearing, form-fitting underwear versus not, that was the sell. I could repeat that because every time podcast, stage, copy on her, like in her book, it's all the same story. So we don't have to come up with new storylines every single time.
It's interesting. I started my career in executive search, and I used to interview or be in interviews with CEOs or very, very senior people, much more senior than I was. It was my first job out of uni. And I noticed that when they were asked a complex question, if they were considering the answer, they would sit there in silence and just take a breath and consider the answer. And as a very green post-university, woman, I was like, this is so awkward. Why are they stopping? And now I'm able to look back and say, whoa, they were so sure of themselves that they didn't need to fill the space. They took a moment because they wanted to really consider their response. And they were not there to make anyone else feel comfortable. They were there to deliver a really considered and appropriate response. And so I'm glad that you said about taking that space, because it's certainly what I observed. And it really does build confidence in their competence because they feel comfortable to sit in that silence. So I think that's fantastic. You talked about Sarah Blakely and knowing her story inside and out. I feel like there's a bit of a misconception or a thought out there that we have to keep saying new things and reinventing things and giving new bits of content and information to keep people engaged. But what you're saying is continue repeating the same message. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why it's important to stay to your message rather than feeling like you have to keep creating new content?
In order to sell us as a brand, we need our audience to know who we are. If we keep flipping the script every week about what we're going to focus on in our content, what we're going to talk about, if I have clients come to me and they're just like, I've got to write this keynote for this script or for this stage. And then 3 months later, I've got to write a keynote for this stage and this script. I can't build your relevancy in your space, because you never want to be the person that says, I can speak on anything. A jack of all trades, a master of none. I want to know what I'm getting when I come and hear you speak. That's not to say that you still don't delight and surprise me throughout that presentation. Because if I go and hear Stephen Bartlett speak, and I did when he came to Australia last year, I had read his book prior to him coming out. I'd consumed many number of podcasts. So why would I still, knowing a lot about his business, a lot about his upbringing, when he dropped out of uni at 18, when he started all these companies and all that sort of stuff, why would I still want to go and hear him speak and pay money for a ticket, whatever it was a couple $100. His book was $30 and his podcast is for free. But I'm so drawn in by his brand. And the age-old saying, doesn't matter how many times you hear something, it takes one person to say it slightly differently and it just drops in for you. And in that moment on that stage, there were nuggets of wisdom that I'd never heard in his podcast and are not in his book that I would have missed out on if I hadn't have gone. The facts and all of the ideas stay the same, but he still built in moments of surprise to me that was worth me getting out of bed and being there late on a Friday night in Melbourne to hear him speak. And that is what makes the difference between an average speaker and a remarkable speaker that will book out audiences when they do tours around the world. So keeping some of the goodness the same every single time, it's what we can depend upon. It's what we can rely on for you. So if I go and say, I know Ange and she would be phenomenal for this because of this, this, and this, I can sell you to other people. It's like you always want people to talk positively about you when you're not in the room. I need to know what your brand is and what you stand for. And if that needle keeps getting moved every single time, I'm diluting and I'm just, but she can speak about this. But hang on a second. She was just on Instagram story speaking about this the other day. And then suddenly I can't package you up like a product and go, she would be brilliant for you, because I don't now know.
And our brain hates change, Jackie. Our brain loves things to be the same. So if our brains don't like change, they don't want to be seeing change. They really love familiarity. And I think that's been a big mindset shift for me in people wanting familiarity and the brain wanting familiarity. And the reality is people may see you once or they might consume one. Most people are not listening to every single podcast or seeing every Instagram post or being in every one of your presentations. So I think that's a really good reminder to have. And Stephen Bartlett is phenomenal at telling a story. I have to say, I feel like he had that Rolodex exactly as you said. And I saw him too. And I felt like he was excellent at bringing down that Rolodex of stories to solidify his points, which was really engaging.
what he did beautifully on the night was he had VIPs, and I think he met them either before, during the interval, or afterwards. And for in Melbourne, I think he had a young kid of maybe, I think it was between 18 to 21, come up to him and say, I want to start a podcast, but I want to talk to leaders about how they've built a business. But who's going to come and talk to a 21-year-old? So even though I know his story, I've listened to his podcast, I've read his books, he gave me moments of surprise and delight throughout his presentation for stuff that was relevant. He actually found, because the VIPs were all sitting in the front row, so he actually just went, where are you? Where are you? The kid put his hand up. Suddenly the audience was there with them and they felt like they were getting a one-on-one coaching session that had happened behind the scenes. We were all brought along for the ride. It was just chef's kiss in terms of making things relevant to that very night in that very moment. And that's where he can go around Australia, and you could have gone to Sydney and Melbourne and you would have gotten something slightly different each time that made it worthwhile for you to go twice.
Such a great example. He did similar in the one that I saw in Brisbane, but a different story. So It's such a great touch. Yeah. We've covered so much today, Jackie, and I feel like you've given so many wonderful, really practical tips for the audience to apply to their speaking journey in whatever field they're in. If there was one thing that you wanted to leave the audience with today to send them on their way and speak boldly and confidently, what would that be?
Oh, you're distilling this down to one, Angela. How dare you?
I know it's a big ask.
It's a big ask. Okay. Something that I'm following for 2025 is, my motto is, I'm just going to ask. I'm just going to ask. I'm going to ask for opportunities. I'm going to ask for coffee catch-ups. I'm going to ask for speaking opportunities. But what I'm doing on the flip side of that is I'm removing the outcome or the result. Because if I take this back into acting days, every audition I wanted, there was no audition that I walked into just going, oh God, I guess I'm just going to get this over and done with. Like I wanted every role I went for. But if I hang on to the outcome and not the process and not the dream or the love that I have for acting, I would have fallen over and given up years ago. So I think if you are just willing to put yourself out there, ask for the pay rise, ask for the change in your work hours and make them more flexible. Ask for that speaking opportunity. If you don't ask, you don't get. But if someone says no to you, that's a no for now, but it's not a no forever. Revisit it. Be bold enough to ask again. So my motto going in to 2025 is, I'm just going to ask. And I hope that you can all do that as well.
Such a wonderful piece of advice to leave us on today, Jackie. And I think asking without being tied to the outcome is really, really important. Like you said, if you don't ask, you don't get, and you're no worse off than when you started. So thank you so much for your time and your generosity of sharing your information. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining me on Work and Wellness. If today's episode resonated with you, remember, someone in your network might need to hear this too. Share it with a colleague or friend who could use these insights. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so find us on Instagram at Mind Your Grit, where we share daily tips and continue these discussions. And if you found value in today's episode, please take time to rate and review the show. It makes such a huge difference and helps other people discover conversations they might really need. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we're building a community of people who believe that success and well-being go hand in hand. You can find the notes, resources, and links from today's episode at mindyourgrit.com. This is Work and Wellness with Ange Davis. Your work matters, your wellness matters, and this is where it all comes together. See you next week.